Stua avu keti tau peka pahanga na rera tēnā koutou. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saurabh. I have the privilege to present this particular discussion on sustainability. That was at least my initial assignment, which I had taken on from Matt Watson earlier. I think it was December. But as you know, when you give a topic to an academic, they sometimes change it. So I have changed it a bit because I thought that the aspect of innovation would be something that you'd appreciate. But I mentioned as I was starting that it is a privilege to engage with you, and I want to start by elaborating on that. Whenever I've had the chances to engage with first-year students, I've always found, well, I would find you firstly in the graduation in a few years, not too many, and secondly, that over the years I found you, of course, as successful engineers, but in many instances in your roles as people who are involved in policy setting, policy making, people who are involved in leadership roles, people who are thinking not just about national and regional priorities, but people that are shaping global goals and directions. In fact, this week, one of our students from engineering will be speaking at the SENA dialogue that takes place in India, where the two prime ministers will be there. And so you can in fact see that amidst you will be people who will be making these changes in the time in your journey as engineers and in various career paths that you may take. And that's why I think it is a privilege to be here, to be able to engage with you. This topic on sustainability and innovation, I want to start with a quotation, and I'll put it on just now. But I thought it's a quotation that I'll first say and then let you think a little about it before I put it on again. Is that this is a quotation from a Nobel laureate, Wangari Maathai, who said, she says that in a few decades, the relationship between the environment, conflict, and resources will become as obvious as the connectedness that we see between human rights, democracy, and peace. And so if you think about that particular quotation, and I've said it so you can think as you're reading this, is if you think about the times we're in and the times that you will be in future in your career, I already say this, I recognize that there is a gap of 3-4 years ahead, but I have seen those gaps change and diminish as you journey along, and thus I think that this is a saying that already in a way manifests in different parts of the world, but it is an interesting, and I thought of taking this particular quotation of this Nobel laureate because she also saw the power of small by planting one tree at a time in a place called Kenya in East Africa, to a point today that the Green Belt movement has over 51 million in that part of the world with deforestation that took place. So the power of small is an interesting component. Now, before I proceed into too much, I just want to say that this particular discussion or presentation is not designed, and you will go into sessions today, or you would have been, where you go into a session where there are 15 or 20 takeaways. This particular session is not intended to have so many takeaways. In fact, there will only be one takeaway. And that takeaway will be a particular framework on sustainability and innovation, which I think would be relevant and implementable in various projects and initiatives and programs that you would do in engineering, but also more broadly in things that you may take. So there is really one takeaway, and when we are getting there in the narration, I will make sure that you are well aware that that's the takeaway. And so we will get there in a few moments. This is an interesting week, 22nd March. We have an hour of Earth Hour this week. And this is a picture which is from Apollo 8, which is one of the first pictures that was taken in 1967, 24 December 1967. And it was the first picture that was taken from the moon that showed the connectedness that Earth has. And some of you would have seen this picture. It was, well, you would have not seen the original one, but you would have seen the way, because it was at a 95 degrees tilt, which is what is presented here. But it was called the Earthrise. Apollo 10 took another picture, and this was all in preparation before the first opportunity when there would be astronauts who would walk on the moon. But these pictures bring about interconnectedness. And so the takeaway of these two images is really the interconnectedness that we have as a planet. So the outline is the following. First, looking at the definition of sustainability, some context setting, and networks and complex systems, the mega trends of which are arising, and some of you are part of those. We are all part of the mega trends. Then the problem statement, then the takeaway on the toolkit that might be of interest, and we'll talk about some case studies and summarize the rest of that. The sustainability was a topic that was described first. It's not a new word. It was a word that was coming up, but I think it came really in a global sense together through the Brundtland Commission report, which was one of the prime ministers of Norway. She led it. And definition. There are many definitions, but I take the simpler one that's available. And this is the simplest, which is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I thought this is an interesting definition because there were times where you could say, well, we could do whatever we want right now because the next generation can come and fix things. But here is the difference in this particular definition, is that the future does become a parameter of the design of what we do today. And that is probably a major shift in this particular definition. The text, the complete text, is available, and I've got the library link if you are interested. The UC values, the Tiatitanga in particular, embodies that particular aspect of protection and partnering with the environment. And of course, in New Zealand, there are many instances, for example, the Whanganui River, which has a first classification as a person to personify the relationship with the environment. And I thought that is an interesting angle to also keep in mind in this particular journey. I also thought about this because as we're embarking on the Engineers Without Border, the project, there would be certain relations that happens in the Timor-Leste region, which would be, there will be certain analogies that may be quite of interest. And some of those analogies, particularly the cultural angles, which we'll talk about later on, may be very unique and different in some sense. But as I proceed into defining the challenge, the complex networks, I wanted to bring a couple of pictures which you'd all be familiar with. I told you that this is not a very heavy piece of it, but as you reflect on it and as you sit back and think about it, these will be obvious. Here is a picture of the global transportation network, and actually it's quite interesting that this whole network came to a standstill about 3-4 years ago, where there was a ship called Ever Given, run by a company called, anyone know the story of Ever Given? You want to say it very quickly? It did. And so the Suez Canal at one point is narrowest width is 200 meters, and here is this massive ship, length of about 400 meters, and guess what happens? It moves horizontally, blocks, and massive ship, damages of almost $1 billion over a short 9 days. It might probably be more over a short 9-day period. So that's the kind of thing that one finds today, is that the global, and of course it completely disrupts the shipping. But there are many other instances that you can think about when it comes to this. But the key picture here is the complexity of networks that has come about between the connectivity. Here's another example, the human brain, and again, you can appreciate that that's another complex system. The metabolic network of a person, again, complex. By the way, this resembles a metro system of a busy city. Not too different, but the complexity is depicted. Another example instance is of the networks and complex system is the undersea cables of the internet. And again, you can see quite a few that's there. And they do meet their own challenges. This is probably a very simple instance of a challenge. All right? Didn't succeed. It's probably the way that it tested. But anyway, you get the picture. And you can imagine that if there's a disruption in this particular network, it could be a mega disruption. So, moving forward, I'll provide some other examples. This is a cross-border banking system. Again, you'd think not very easy to disrupt. Most of you would not, or some of you may have heard on this, in 2008, the global economic crisis that took place, and there are other examples of it that have taken place. And the interesting thing was when that particular economic crisis was about to take place, and you asked the chief economists and people in the area what nobody had any idea. They were all saying that everything would be fine and everything is going in the right direction, and these are the predictions. And 2 days later, it was a global financial crisis. Very much not very different to the instance we talked about earlier with the shipping. Sometimes happening very fast in an unconnected. So, maybe pause here a bit. If you like the picture, it was done by AI, I can't take any credits. If you don't like it, well, it was done by AI. Here's a picture of New Zealand, and the question is, in our context, how are we connected to the world? I've given some examples. Any thoughts on what these connections are? Some of the obvious ones and some are the less obvious ones. Anyone wants to think about how we are connected? Yep. Internet. That's great, great. What else? Yep. The export, the trade network. What else? Yep. Travel of people. Yep. By the way, as you're raising hands, Senator Swati, just say who you are as well, if that's okay. I hope that doesn't put any pressure on you. Anyone else? People at the back? You know, this ideas are at the back, right? That's why you stood there. Yeah. Wars. Yeah. What else? Yeah. Religion. Yeah, so you get the picture, right? There's a lot of interconnectedness. Anyone else? I haven't heard from this side of the room. No pressure. Anyone on this side of the room that wants to? I'm feeling bad because I know there's another venue that's seeing this through a live stream, and sorry I can't pick on you, but anyone from this side that wants to participate? No? Okay, we'll come back on another one later. So the digital technology, so all of these areas that you've mentioned is actually there. This is just an incomplete list. But digital and technological connectivity, and you can read faster than I can speak, so you can see those areas, geopolitical and security links, as someone mentioned, global transportation, cultural and educational exchange, and the others. But what then this means is that we are more interconnected than ever, and that is a given. The second part is that in this context, given this is, let me say this is one context, which is the interconnectedness, because we'll bring in the other contexts now of the megatrends, and of engineering, since you are pursuing an engineering qualification, how do we chart a future which is sustainable? So that's kind of the problem statement. And in a way, when you're considering your project for EWB, you will also be considering some of these elements. So some of the global megatrends, actually, maybe before I get to the global megatrends, maybe some of you do have some thoughts of what these global megatrends are. So any ideas of global megatrends that you may want to participate? Should we start from this side of the room? Anyone on the global megatrends? Come on, there must be right here on stop it. Global warming is one of them. You had your hand up, did you? On the energy side? Yep. Others? Yep. Education as a global megatrend and the way that it takes place, yep. Simplified design, yep. Yep, there we go. Increase in technology, the influence of AI. Other thoughts on this side? Yep. Increase in population. Inflation. Okay, this is by the way a good rhythm because I can see I can go on for the rest of your after megatrend. Actually, it is indeed the cluster and combination. There are different megatrends. You pick up different places, different people have had, but I think the key clusters are represented here. And this is from City Business Insights, and this is impactful technology, one accelerating individualization. You can see it with the technology side, perhaps related demographic change. I'll put a picture up just now. Rapid urbanization, climate and resource security, and economic power shift. So these are some of the global megatrends that are there. Let me show a picture around demographic shifts. And you will have seen some of these figures in different places, but these are some of the trends that are emerging. Firstly, you notice here that this is the world in 2100 based on population. Gosh, it looks different, isn't it? Did you expect that? By the way, these are not changes of any of the physical geographies, so don't complicate it. This is just based on population dynamics. Quite different, isn't it? Population of the African continent becomes quite big, the Indian population big, population in China not as changes. The New Zealand population, the prediction is to remain more or less the same. However, the working force population will change. And so the workforce right now might be 65%, and that may reduce to 50%. And then you can see the implications that goes along with that. But this also means that it would have an implication on migration patterns, right? So you can, and now if you take this flavor and you map it with the interconnectedness and complex networks, then you can start to see that this axis becomes a complex. Actually, I like to think of it as a systems engineering problem because it has then an influence on technology. What about uncertainties? Well, what we do know for certain is that COVID, but there will be something and other things which will be different, which will have again a global impact. And its ability to move between and around the world would be quite fast and far-reaching implications. So what this means is how we are aware, and one picture that was put was something like this. There is some unintended humor there, but you know that happens occasionally. COVID-19, recession, climate change, this was put in much earlier before, this is an old image from 2021. But you can see that these are some of the things that appear. So that does mean that our approach also needs to evolve, and Engineering New Zealand, which is a signatory to Washington Accord, which is how our programs are accredited. And as you know, that both Matt, myself, Sarah, and the team, we are responsible and accountable in different ways to deliver programs that enable, if you need to go between signatories of the Washington Accord, and that means these are some of the changes that came about formally last year, was the appropriate usage of AI. Actually, you had a discussion on this 2 weeks ago. I'll see where Matt is. Engineering the world is a new graduate attribute of diversity and inclusion, and you can appreciate that this is in the context of the megatrends. So there is some reasons, and that does mean that as a engineering education provider, we have to provide a toolkit that you can use when you're navigating through these. This is just a formal slide that says the same thing. So there are perhaps a couple of ways that one can use to approach the sustainability, and I'm going to changeably for now use sustainable development. And one of the texts which I have enjoyed, it is in the library, and actually, if you want to get an e-copy, that's available through the ProQuest link. Just give you a heads up, it's a couple of hundreds of pages. But the key thing there is this text was written by Jeffrey Sachs, who was the advisor to two of the Secretary Generals of the United Nations in the lead up to the Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals to Kofi Annan and to Ban Ki-moon. So this particular text tries to approach not just the Sustainable Development Goals, but also envisages that these goals that you would meet today, some will have a timeline of 2030, but what would be beyond that 2030? And all of you will encounter that. And in the journeys of these goal changes over the future, you will probably be party to even putting input and supporting and to the next tier beyond 2030, as that we have the current goals have a timeline of 2030. So there are four lenses that they don't explicitly put these lenses, but you know, when you read the text, you might come across the same type of lenses. And the idea of these lenses is that when you have a problem or a context that you're engaging, you take the one lens, you look at the problem with that lens, and then you take the next, or you look at it with that lens, and so on. And if you don't necessarily have to be an expert on each of the lenses, but you know that the lenses exist, and you can then find people who may be an expert from those dimensions, such that as a team, as a multidisciplinary team, you have the best potential solution for that particular frame that you may get. So these lenses, by the way, in the unlikely event that you were falling asleep, I haven't seen anyone in there. I usually call upon people that are falling asleep, so, but I haven't done that. That's a good sign. But in the unlikely event that you were getting tired, this is probably the key takeaway that's there. And it's not very difficult to remember, actually. And I'll tell you, I remember it. And I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember this. And I remember it very simply, that the four lenses, one is geopolitics, two is, I'm not in elaborate on this. So geopolitics, earth systems, techno-economics, and social dynamics. Now, often as engineers, we will think about it from a technology perspective. I work in the space of 5G, moving to 6G telecommunications. That's my area of research. But I can tell you, it is so shaped today by social dynamics and geopolitics. And if I'm unaware of what are the if I'm only aware of the technology dimensions, I will have a blind spot because of the other two lenses, whether I like it or not. So I'm not an expert in the other areas, but I make sure that in the teams that we engage, that there is expertise in those areas that can provide the guidance that's necessary. So that's really the key thing. Now, we're going to end here, so there's still more. But that's the analogy of the lenses. I'm going to give now I'm going to take some case studies. Some of these you will not be familiar with. Some you will be more familiar with. But I wanted to take an example of not a current war, that's just too risky to talk about. But I'll take an example of a war in Syria, which is, and I'll just give you some very quick instances of how these becomes relevant. So it started actually with the earth systems components. Now when you think about war, you're often thinking geopolitics, but starting from an earth system dimensions, because there was a drought. The drought was over a 10-year period that led to movement of people, and the movement of people created a social dynamic, and when people moved in areas where resources became constrained, then there was inflation, there were techno-economic implications, and while all of that was happening, there were two countries that took interest in the same area, and that meant there was a geopolitical dimension. So you immediately had a situation of an extended war that then took several years. Of course, it is ongoing in some sense. But that's a picture, in this case, of a global arena, and while you may not be familiar with the exact context, you can appreciate the parameters. Another instance is of COVID-19. Now, you've all encountered COVID-19, and in the COVID-19 instance, again, these parameters become of interest. There was change to global flight paths, so there were changes in the Earth systems. The way that data was collected for even weather changed. We had insufficient data on prediction. The techno-economics was hindered in the New Zealand context. Tourism industry was hit, and among others, and that meant that there was a need for national changes in how you accommodate when there is those economic challenges, led to social dynamic aspects. And actually, some of the instances, if you look at COVID-19 in relation to the Spanish flu in 1918, actually some of those social dynamics were actually not very different. And then, of course, the geopolitical differences that then emerge and how governments will then have to organize to make sure that citizens and so on have what's required to go through the period. So you kind of get the picture, right, with these four lenses. Yep. Another one. I'll let you quickly look at this one. Artificial intelligence. Can you think about the angles? Let's quickly take these four lenses. Let's start with one. Let's start with whichever one you like. Just say which lens you're looking at and say a parameter. Who wants to take a go? Should the people at the back? By the way, I like the back. I used to be in the back seat usually. Anyone that wants to take a angle? Yep. Earth systems and the energy requirement when you do a ChatGPT or whatever, there's a big energy thing that happens behind. Yes, energy is there. The other side of energy. What was the technique? Yep. 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 The fear of job creation versus automation. Yeah. What else? Come on, you all know AI, you use it all the time. Yeah, change in trust patterns between countries and the privacy issue. Yeah. What else? I mean, you've got the good side. If you take the energy, you've got the energy that it uses, and on the other hand, the energy optimization that it also provides. So you've got a double-edged sword in a way with AI. It also introduces biases in instances because of its reliance on data. But you kind of get the picture, right, with these four lenses? Okay, I'm going to go with another one. Here's a local example. Thanks to this lecture, I decided to go to the Travis wetland to take some pictures. If you haven't been there, for those of you that might be coming from outside of Christchurch, it's a good place to go around and walk about. Similar analysis on the GETS framework. Now I remove the GETS because I know you remember it. Who wants to take an angle of, let's start with Earth systems, advantage of a wet planet? Yep. Support to biodiversity. Yep. What are the other instances? Flood control. Yeah, especially. Yeah. Yeah, you have an alternative for, again, related to biodiversity. You've got a couple of examples that you can use, and obviously the social dynamics that it creates, given Christchurch's history as well. So you kind of get the idea that you have those four lenses and you can look at it. Can you think of examples that you might want to consider around these four lenses? Sorry? Cycle lanes. Oh, that's an interesting one. Cycle lanes. You want to take off the four lenses? Which one? Great. Now, I was going to challenge that for you. Okay, but you can see that there are different sides, right? So immediately the moment you start to bring the four lenses in the cycle lane context, you can see the geopolitical lanes, and you can see the Earth system and the technomics. And there are many examples. If you look at our economic zone that is much extended around New Zealand, that's an area you can take extreme condition areas such as Antarctica, we're all there. And you can take multiple examples, and as you transpose these lenses, you would see that. So the question is around the sustainability. These are words, and sometimes we use them interchangeably. And there is even some contestation on what is the end goal. Is it sustainability or is it sustainable development? I personally like to see sustainability as the end goal. And sustainable development. So conceptually, for me, sustainability is the end goal. Pragmatically, some people see sustainable development as the end goal because sustainable development is not just sustainability, but it's also about the policy infrastructure that informs it. It's a whole lot of things that pragmatically is seen as the end rather than sustainability, and some see sustainability as just the formalities. So anyway, sustainable development goals is then the pathway that takes us there, the roadmap that gets us there. So in terms of the roadmap, the United Nations initially put together in 2000 the Millennium Development Goals. Now in summary, there were 8 Millennium Development Goals, and there's one cluster, 1, 2, 3, which deals with social development. The second cluster deals with health, and then it's environment and global partnership. So you could break these 8 goals into those 4 clusters, but these were targeted more at the developing world and they were more government-driven, government-led, and their quest was to reduce the global, for example, poverty by 50%. And when the world puts its focus, it actually achieves that particular goal. Water was another instance where water quality was an area which there was tremendous achievement. Still in absolute numbers, there's a lot to attain. But in summary of the Millennium Development Goals, the quest was, target was for 2015, was to achieve 50% of the global population. This is the water instance that I mentioned. You can again see the figures there that, again, you will see that 50% or times 2 if you want to look at it the other way. The Sustainable Development Goals came out in September 2015. There are 17 of them. By the way, if you don't remember them, that's okay. Or maybe it's not okay. Maybe Matt will ask you to, be able to recite them also. But the way I kind of remember them is this way. Is that I look at the one cluster that deals with people. That's the cluster of 1, 2, and 3. The next sector deals with, well, you could say 1 to 5 has got the people element. The next 6, 7 deals with the planet, as well as 13 to 15. Then 8, 9, and 10, and 11 deal with, and 12 deal with prosperity, still the peace. Then we have 16 that deals with peace, still on peace, and 17 that deals with partnerships. So people, the planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. That's the way I see these Sustainable Development Goals. I really like it that peace and partnership find itself in this day next to each other. It enables us to think about peace cooperation, and I think the rest are elements that are enabling, in a way, to that. But they seem to be together, although you will find, and you will work in companies in future, that will say we focus on these 3. But the interconnectedness of this is really at the heart of the SDGs when they were formulated, because its attainment was to be not for 50% of the world, but for all of the world. And of course, this was developed prior to COVID-19, and several parameters did change in that lead. I just wanted to give a picture of this. Is that sometimes when you're going from a goal, and you might experience this, right? If you're aiming for an 80% in an exam, you have to put in so many hours. But then if you're aiming for 100%, what happens in the last stretch? You have to put a lot more hours, right? Kind of exponentially picks up. Well, maybe not for all of you, but for some of you, right? And the same is applicable when you try to get to that 100% if you want water quality or whatever other sustainable development goal that you might select. Now that last 20% often requires us to think innovatively. I call it the last mile challenge. And you have to think about it innovatively. Else, you need a budget which is infinity, and I know that that doesn't exist. So that's the way that innovation then comes into the way, into our thinking. And there are quite a few examples. So for instance, if you take the water instance, if you want to look at the water infrastructure of a very big city, you can probably fix it because you have enough people and there's tax and things that goes there. But if you're looking at a water infrastructure of a country, you might have areas where you do not have as much population, so how do you find the money to be able to have that? And you might say, well, maybe we need to get the central, but while we get a single water supply there, maybe we need to look at a borehole or some on a decentralized mechanism. And the combination between the centralized and decentralized that gives you that 100% attainment, those require innovative thinking, and the way that you might broker some of the decentralized solutions might also differ. And that's the key thing, is that that last mile does require us to be quite innovative. Actually, the full journey requires us to be innovative, but especially the last mile. So thinking outside the box, the saying of, once you were told that don't think inside the box, then you're told don't think, think outside the box, sometimes without the box, but there's a box involved. And so that is useful. Now I wanted to go to this piece. Then assume that you've had the chance to look at your EWB project. Is that right? And if you had to very quickly in the last couple of minutes think about this framework with the Timor-Leste and the area of Lodi Har, if you just think about it very quickly, whichever of the 7 project directions you might take, what could be some of the areas that might be of interest in using these 4 lenses? Any takers? Yep. The types of soil that might exist. Okay, so you've got an Earth system component. What else? How they get resources to their country, yeah. So it's interesting because there's a circular economy component as well. But you bring about a good point, because there are also neighboring interests, and there's always been in that region, right? What else? Yeah. That's a very good point. You want to translate what that just means? It's the local law. So I don't know if you picked up in my mihi that I'm South African, and it's an extremely interesting area, because I remember once having a project where you had to deliver, and it was in a rural area, and you had to deliver and we went with a small group of students, just like in some instances you'd go, and we said we need to deal, and there was cooking taking place, and that was generating some pollution, and students and a group of us looked, and we said, oh cool, we're going to solve this, here's solar solutions. And we quickly got and solar, and it was working, it was nicely set up, everything looked great. And we engaged with the villagers, and they said, great, you got it done well. 6 months later, we go back, and guess what happens? Any ideas? Yep. They're gone back. Everything is there doing whatever they'd always done, and none of the tech was being used. And we had done the training and things. What happened? It was a 6 months, by the way. We didn't even have a very long lead time to discover our failure. Yeah, that's actually what was happening. So here's what happened. So this was in a village called Itlakane in Botswana, just north of South Africa. And we didn't take into account that the previous cooking method was generating smoke. Now, who likes smoke, right? But the mosquitoes were being taken away. This was a malaria area. And we brought in wonderful new technology, but the smoke meant that the mosquitoes removal of smoke meant mosquitoes came back. And it affected malaria. It brought back malaria suddenly in a more deeper way. And there are no medical doctors there. So you can imagine that for the villagers, this was like, okay, the smoke kills the, well, we don't really know because we live anyway. Lifetime expectancy is in the future. But this was in the present, it was immediate. So very easy, right? Had we engaged with the chief in the area, as we could have, right? If you think about the Wadi Harun, you just mentioned that there is a chief. Now that's an interesting concept here, right? I mean, how many of you have the idea of a chief in your area? It's very different, right? The international students, I suppose, you may come from areas where you might have that. But the moment you start thinking about these 4 lenses, you start to recognize that actually we may need to think about the social dynamics. We might need to think about the geopolitical elements, and we may not have the expertise. However, there may be somebody in the class who might be from an international background that may have actually experienced some of these dynamics and that took advantage. It may not be a person in your class necessarily, but it may be a knowledge body that you might want to bring in, or you might want to bring in a person or another student from another part of the university that can help to think of that. And of course, you can also engage with AI and so on. But it does change the perspective, isn't it? Good technology solutions don't always deliver because these dynamics have the ability to displace us. So I'm now coming to the end, as you might be realizing. So this is sometimes how things look. That looks like quite a journey. I know this is kind of nice too. But sometimes it does look like this. And I just wanted to leave this because I do know that when you're doing these projects, whether it's the EWB project or there will be others in the engineering pathway. But I do want to leave this because I do know that there are moments when there are team dynamics that come into play, and there are other things that come into play, but the story didn't necessarily be that bad. Just on the last bits, last is one of those things that you underscore in last. The engineering projects and community service, if you do think that your EWB project, by the way, you own the intellectual property as a student here, and that means that this may be a start of your social entrepreneur journey. And if you do feel you're in a position at the end of this course or this year or any part of this, there are funding avenues that are available.